The consequences of being rotten in science education are very serious. First of all, there's the question of dwindling economic competitiveness. Industries in which the United States used to be world leader are trickling away to other countries. New industries, cutting-edge technologies are being developed in other countries much more than in the United States. And this has powerful and progressive economic consequences. I mean, progressively negative economic consequences for the United States. And beyond that, people who understand science are able to influence the future in a way that people who don't understand science can't do. You can elect representatives and influence legislation in a way that you can't do if you don't understand what the issues are. And so many of the issues facing us for the future are connected with science and technology. So where are the failings? You give standardized tests to American kids and kids from lots of other nations, not just Japan and Korea, but Singapore and Canada and England. And you find the United States, let's say junior high school kids, are in the bottom 10% of the world. You find that that applicants for entry-level jobs at leading American electronics company, 80% of them can't pass a 5th grade mathematics test. So this is extremely serious for reasons of our national well-being. Now, the failings are on many levels. So the schools don't have money to buy the laboratory equipment that you see missing. The teachers are not as good as they ought to be. Or take another issue. Almost every newspaper in America has a daily astrology column. Astrology, of course, is a hoax. It's fake. It's bunk. How many of them have even a weekly science column? Take television. Is there any program on television in which the hero is someone dedicated to finding out how the universe works? Where are the role models in science? When's the last time we heard an intelligent comment about science, not medicine, not technology, science, from the President of the United States? When's the last time we heard science discussed on an evening news program? Science, not technology, not medicine. This problem runs all the way through the society and is very worrisome. Of course it can be fixed, but it's going to take money and a change in attitudes to do it. The great thing that is happening in our time is that we are able, through a method which can actually make some progress towards the real universe out there, to find out something about origins, and this is the scientific method applied to the science of cosmology. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I thought it was more important to address the issue of feeling unhappy because it wasn't immediately understandable.
Well, yes, I find that extremely soothing, actually, because it is a kind of sort of formidable task of grasping this that makes me want to retreat into trivial questions like, is this idea of predicting backwards going to put astrologers out of business?
Nothing will put astrologers out of business.
Well,
alas.
And on UFOs, I would just say no one would be happier than me if we were being visited, and it would save me so much trouble. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I would say the evidence that we are now or ever have been visited, despite the claims of being abducted and God knows what happens on the spaceship, those claims are crummy. The evidence just isn't good, and my mind is open. I'm willing to look at new cases, but there has been no compelling cases. Physical evidence, photographs, a stolen logbook of the alien captain, nothing that would convince us. The system was a lot more traffic in it than there is now. And a lot of that debris we know from the exploration of Halley's Comet, for example. Comets are very rich in organic matter. So the stuff of life was falling on the Earth. Now, is that the hand of God or not? Well, if you believe in God, God established the physical laws of the universe, and chemistry is a consequence of physics, so all those molecules that led to life were made by God. It's possible to believe that. I'm not opposed to that idea, but I just say there is no evidence for it. And where there's no evidence, I say keep an open mind. Don't commit yourself in the absence of compelling evidence. I would have to say the recalcitrance of the United States. It's painful to say, but you look at a set of issues about nuclear arms reductions, a comprehensive test ban treaty which is being discussed at the United Nations today. Dozens of countries all over the world are urging it to be done. Soviet Union says they're for it. Who's against it? The United States, despite the fact that we have tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. You look at issues of demerving nuclear weapons. That is, right now we have many weapons, the MX, for example, many missiles which have 10 warheads on a single missile. At a time of crisis, there's a temptation to preempt. If those guys can destroy 10 of my cities with one of their rockets, let me destroy their rocket before it is launched. It's unstable on both sides. The Soviets also are merved up the gazoo. Look at issues of massive cuts in the nuclear arsenals, not just the start 30%, but 99%. That's where we ought to be looking. Who's the recalcitrant partner? Which nation is the one that's not interested in it at all? It's the United States. I'm very concerned that the United States is stuck in some kind of Cold War freezer and hasn't come to grips with the kind of world we're now in.
The resources is they went into increasing budgets for arms. Isn't that where the money went?
That and making rich people richer. Those are the two places.
Well, the thing about rich people, and being one, I guess, is the money all gets reinvested. If you've got money, you put it in the bank lends it out to people to buy homes or cars or whatever.
But not poor people. But not poor people.
Well, that's a good point.
It tends to stay up at that highly stratified, very...
More people get employed with capital formation and so forth. Are you a socialist?
I'm not sure what a socialist is,
well,
but I believe that the government has a responsibility to care for the people. I'm not talking about dole. I'm talking about making people self-reliant, people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace. And this country has vast wealth. You just look at what something like Star Wars, the money spent on Star Wars, already spent $20 billion on it. If these guys are permitted to go ahead, they will spend $1 trillion on Star Wars. Think of what that money could be used for, to educate, to help, to bring people up to a sense of self-confidence, to improve not just the happiness of people in America, but their economic standing, to improve the competitiveness of the United States compared to other countries. We are using money for the wrong stuff. It's something like this. You burn fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. The world economy runs on that, right? You know? And as a consequence, you put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The carbon in the coal combines with the oxygen of the air and makes carbon dioxide, CO2, releasing energy. That's why we do it. Our technology has now gotten to such an awesome level that we are able to put so much of this stuff, CO2 and other greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere that we're changing the composition of the air and changing its radiative properties. We're now keeping heat in, the temperatures are rising. Nobody knows precisely when it will be that things get a certain level of bad, but what I believe is very clear is that we continue doing things this way and things are going to get very bad. Very bad means temperatures rise, increasing drought in continental interiors, as you say, sea level rising, flooding of coastal areas and islands, and no cutoff. All this continuing indefinitely until one way or another we stop. That's serious. Let me start with Noah. The story of Noah's Ark is, of course, a story. The books of the various great religions, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, and many others, are filled with stories. That doesn't mean we are to interpret them literally, and There are all sorts of problems with the Noah's Ark story, one of which is kangaroos. How did the kangaroos get to Australia, if you literally believe the story of Noah's Ark? So I'm sure you meant that in a light tone, and my response is likewise. How to keep kids in school? Well, kids, I believe, are fundamentally very smart. And if they see school being taught by people who themselves are not interested in it, people who cannot do very well at teaching, if what they're being taught has no practical application, then why should they do it? So, for example, there's an awful lot of kids graduating high school who go into entry-level jobs in the service economy, waiting on tables, slinging hash, and so on. Now, do they get more money if they were good in second-year algebra? The answer is no. And they understand that. If there were more jobs that required this kind of education, there would be more kids who would go into that kind of education with some enthusiasm. If there were a connection between how well you did in school and how fast your salary increased later, as there is in many countries, kids would be much more interested.
The viewers of this program do to make a difference in correcting these problems?
They can make sure that candidates who don't understand and aren't deeply committed to ending and reversing the nuclear arms race, to stopping greenhouse warming, and to stopping the depletion of the ozonosphere, that those guys aren't, men and women, are not elected. It's not enough to have a candidate say, I'm an environmentalist. In what way are you an environmentalist, Mr. or Ms. candidate? Take a look at the most recent election. There we had a candidate who said that he was an environmentalist. He, in contrast to the previous 8 years, where we had an uncompromising anti-environmentalist in the White House, okay, now there's a president, Mr. Bush, who at least acknowledges that there's a problem. We didn't even know that from listening to Mr. Reagan. But if you look at Mr. Bush's budget, we see not a hint of any real commitment to the environment. So I say in a democracy, that's the most important thing a person can do. There are a lot of other things a person can do. You can plant trees. Every individual can plant trees. That's something that's very constructive. You can boycott industries which are irresponsible on global warming and on chlorofluorocarbons. There are many things people can do, but they have to understand the issue before they can do those things.
Well, we just...
It's a very good question, and if I may say, very nicely put. You can't force people not to have children. I mean, it's inhuman at the most fundamental level, and also I think it's very hard to do, except if you're willing to accept totalitarian system. But there is a little known but extremely important fact, and that is that when the per capita income, when the amount of money people make gets above a certain very pitifully low level, they voluntarily reduce the population growth. So let me now come back to that issue in a little more detail. As the world population continues to increase exponentially or nearly exponentially, all the sorts of environmental problems we were talking about before get worse, because the more people there are, the more fossil fuels get burned, the more greenhouse gases and all the rest of it. The more people there are, the more competition for resources there is, the more human misery, the more likelihood of war. It's a very serious issue, as are so many of the things we've been talking about on this program, all having to do with the growth in our technology. Now, if you ask people in the developing world, that's where the problem is, that's where the greatest growth rate is, why do you have so many kids? Don't you know you can't support them? The answer you get back is extremely telling. It's something like this. The kids require very little financial investment. You don't have to send them to school. Nobody goes out to the store to buy clothes for them. And they're useful. They can gather wood, they can gather water, they can help on the scrabbly farm or whatever it is. And most important, if you have lots of kids, then maybe one of them will survive into adulthood and take care of you in your old age, because there's no social security. It's a way, having lots of kids is a way to ensure the parents' old age. Now, all over the world, East and West, Buddhist and Catholic, former communist and capitalist countries, all over, when the income rises above a certain minimum level, the population growth rate takes a steep dive, and that's because now there is enough to take care of your old age. The only exceptions are countries in which the status of women is so low that they are effectively slaves and have nothing to say about how many children they should have. So, what can we do? We can help raise the standard of living of the billion poorest people on the planet, not by handouts, not by giving them fish, say, but by giving them fish hooks, by helping to achieve economic self-sufficiency. And that is very much in our interest, as well as being the kind of activity that every one of the great religions urges on us.